In this world, there's a lot of symbols to choose from in any culture. And it's strange that three places, four places, but let's say three places in the same continent seem to overvalue the same symbol. For example, if we take the Bantu people, we realize that they have religious, somewhat over religious attachment to a headrest. Needless to say, it has to do with partially the sky and the ground, and it has to do with dreams and ancestors. If you look at the West Africans, you have the golden stool, you have the Akan, you have all kinds of people who worship the headrest. Why? Why would they worship a headrest? Again, they have so many other symbols to choose from and so many other inventions since then. But what of the Egyptian one that looks the same and has similar meanings, especially since their history is so different from the rest of them? And this would be nothing if it wasn't the same in North Africa in general. For example, the Amazigh, who worship this shape in their entirety of their alphabet. And again, they have so many to choose from. Just like Southern Africans, they love geometric patterns. So why are they not obsessed with some geometric pattern instead of being obsessed with this exact
The
shape?
Ashanti Kingdom is one of the largest kingdoms in Africa. The soul and spirit of the Ashanti nation lies in the golden stool.
Each time you see the golden stool, you are saying it's God Himself.
The Ashanti will do anything to protect the golden stool.
Golden stool is one of the most unique elements in their cultural preservation.
It's something we all.
It's one thing to venerate the shape, it's another thing to have it and have it possess such a deep meaning to your culture as a whole. This is not one person worshiping it, this is an entire culture. And for what reason? What can you see about this shape that would make you venerate it so much? Now, I'll say something about the Egyptian one, which is it is a god, I think was Nu, and he's holding up the sky and he's holding up the ground. If he's holding up the sky and he's holding up the ground, what does this mean? Does this track in any other place in Africa?
2,000 years. Its alphabet is full of symbolic meaning. Here, Ajazul defines one of the most famous and recognizable letters. If you see this symbol painted, you know you are in Amazigh-friendly territory.
يوري الاستقرار الإنسان في الأرض بساقين ننزل باش نعمل فرس يتحلوا ساقين نعمل نص دائرة. أنا مستقر في هذه الأرض وأتنفس من السماء. نوري السماء بيديا نعمل نصف دائرة. يجي الرمز الأمازيغي فري مان، استقرار الإنسان في الأرض وتنفسه من السماء.
It's kind of strange that even to the Amazigh it resembles free men when we know that the golden stool is essentially became the symbol of freedom within the Asante people. Go over these four cultures one more time. You have the Egyptians, and Shu is the god in the middle. He is the father of the sky and the ground. The sky and the ground are twins, and he separates them. This is why they're separated. But notice that the sky god, Nut, is facing upside down. This, making the sky be in this shape, is merely a artistic feature, meaning that they squeezed it, they forced it to mean the shape. In the same way that the sky is in the Amazigh, you saw there that it resembled a man with his hands raised. And I have said to you before, the way you praise in African cultures, no matter which culture you go to in Africa, is you raise your hands. It's unlike the prayer hands where you put them together or you put them on your lap. It's arms raised, resembles praise. This is why this symbol is forced. There's actually a different headrest with two legs, and it is more looking in the direction that Nut would be looking. And this headrest is similar to the Zulu ones. And there's a lot of headrests like that as well. But let's go into the other cultures. It's important to understand before we talk about this that the Nguni people that I'm about to talk about are animists. So instead of seeing people in their headrest, they see animals because animals and people are the same thing in their religion. And you can see in their headrest that instead of a human holding up the headrest, it's an animal. But because of this similarity, you still see some that resemble human beings, like this very well carved one. We read, a headrest, for example, may have been brought by a bride from her parents' homestead as a betrothal gift to her husband homestead. The headrest would be regarded as a link to her father's spirit and the Amadlozi, her forebearers' spirits. Colnell, the art of southeast Africa. And this is the one that I was referring to that's similar to Nut. Bovine illusions. Like I said, cattle represent human beings in this culture because they're animists and ancestral worshippers. Bovine illusions. Though their forms may seem abstract, Zulu neck rests often reference the anatomy of cattle. The upper section on which the sleeper rests his neck mimics the animal's back, and the bottom portion represents its four legs. And finally, it says, cattle for the ancestors. In Southeast Africa, cattle stood for wealth. They also played a role in communication between the living and the dead. Cattle were given as wedding presents and sacrificially offered to the ancestors who might contact their descendants through dreams. And you'll see, I'll read you from a book about ancestors from the 1800s that is written by a British guy who talks about the religion of Southeast Africa, the Nguni people. And he says that the people were contacted through cattle, like literally, like you would have a dream, you'd go to sleep. If you see cattle, then you know that you are being contacted. And it flat out says, reference to bovines in both forms and materials are common on Zulu pipes and snuff containers, as well as neck rest tobacco, like cattle in Southeast Africa, was recognized for the ability to foster communication with the ancestral ram. Now remember, these guys have a completely different religion than the Egyptians, sort of. They have a completely different religion in the sense that they do not exactly worship the same thing. But as you can see, to try and tie it all together, the Nguni people are animists and they use animals in a symbolic yet literal way of communication with ancestors, which is not unlike the Egyptians. Some of these gods, there's no need for them to be anything but men, but instead they're represented by animals. Like you see the human head, the human bodies with animal heads in Egypt, but they actually worship the literal animal. Like the crocodile, they would put golden necklaces and golden bangles around actual crocodiles because the crocodile god was merely a personification of a literal crocodile. And like you see with these headrests, these cultures, this headrest clearly existed before these cultures came up with these religions. And so these religions are being forced. Now, why would they force something down this tube unless there's already a pre-existing bias within them to go down this rabbit hole? And like I said, these cultures have a lot of things. They could do pyramids. They could do hills, they could do grassland, they could do colors, but instead they choose this specific thing, something you sit on. Since when was something you sit on or you sleep on supposed to represent the sky? To further cement this sky reference in all four cultures. So I've already done the sky reference in Amazigh with that man who showed you that the arms raised means sky. In Egypt, that thing represents Nut, the sky god. And Zulu, which the sky has to do with that shape and also has to do with ancestors who come from the sky and descend upon you to give you messages from the ancestors as bovine, as cattle. So you see here in the West African one, it says the golden stool has been a symbol of power in the Ashanti kingdom since the 17th century. According to oral history, Okomfo Anokie, a high priest and one of the two founders of the Ashanti Confederacy, conjured the golden stool, decorated with the bells, and caused it to descend from the sky, where it landed at the feet of Osei Tutu, the first Ashantahini king of the Ashanti. Again, it's obvious that this shape, the stool, predates this culture. And so it's another culture where they force this message because probably it predates this. Just like how a lot of Christian cultures, a lot of cultures started utilizing the cross into their meanings, even though the cross was something more ancient, but then they have to put it in there. This is the African cross, even though the cross is African, East African to be exact. I want to preface the fact that this ankh or this N or Ka symbol represents a man with his arms spread in praise, and it represents resurrection, which has to do with coming back to life. And if you think about it, that's what ancestors do. It has to do with life, it has to do with longevity. This is a symbol that is the same as the stool, except that in this one, it's much more clear. Furthermore, it's one of the earliest symbols of crosses that you see. You also see a double cross where you see this cross and another cross inside. And you see this in Judea, Ethiopia, meaning predating Christian Ethiopians, meaning that the Ethiopians use crosses before Christianity as well. This Egyptian symbol also predates the Christian crosses by a couple thousand years. Before I talk about the further connections between the Christian cross and the stool shape, subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000. When you look at them all together, it's kind of ridiculous. And here's the thing that's actually scary. The fact that they have this symbolic thing to it. It's not like headrests are completely unique to Africa. These type are, but headrests are common all over the world, especially in the ancient world before they started using real pillows. But those have no, and I repeat, they have no symbolic feature. They are purely practical, unlike this one, where their practice or their religious practice seems to be repetitive and consistent throughout the entire continent. I have left out one part of Africa, which is East Africa, the Ethiopians and the Somalis. We know that the Somalis used pillows as a shorthand of prayer, and they also use them in weddings. And you notice that in the Bantu version, you bring these to weddings. So we understand that there is a continuity about them. In Ethiopia, it's thought that they are purely a practical thing, but remember that there's a crescent moon in Ethiopia, which is worshipped, but the crescent moon sometimes it's facing upside down, and I think that that's what it represents. But I'm not going to make that claim right now. All I'm going to say is Somalia, Egypt, Berberland, which is North Africa, Asante, which is West Africa, Central Africa with the Bantu, and Southern Africa with the Bantu. Some of you will notice that it has to do with nationhood as well. And if you notice, the Amazigh one is wherever you see that symbol, know that you're in Amazigh territory. The second one is the Asante people. That's a symbol for their nation. In the Zulus, those symbols symbolize ancestors and the previous beings that live in that area. And so these are Zulu symbols representing the people in general, the nation. In Egypt, it's the same. That symbol represents the people in general, especially the cross that was then taken up by the Christians to represent Christians in general. And also, if you notice that in Ethiopia, which I didn't mention this whole time, there is another symbol. So you see here in Amharic, it says that they are commonly known as Yagertera, pillow of my land. So there's a typicalness to nationhood. So why do they have anything to do with being reborn? Well, if you notice in the Christian one, the cross was the rebirth of Jesus. And if you'll notice with these, the also have to do with rebirth. For example, the Zulu has to do with being reborn as an ancestor. The Amazigh has to be reborn as free men. The Asante has its own rebirth, which I haven't looked into deeply. And the East Africans, if you look at it right here, Oromifa, they called it Borates, which means the tomorrow you. Its rebirth elements is there as well, deep in the symbolism. And this is probably why Christianity adopted the cross, which also has to do with rebirth, that ankh. In fact, it has to do with the rebirth of yourself, almost like you were an ancestor. If we read here on Wikipedia, it says, the ankh is a T-shaped topped by a droplet-shaped loop. It was used in writing as triliteral sign representing a sequence of 3 consonants. This sequence was found in several Egyptian words, including the term for mirror, which you can see why that shape is a mirror, a floral banquet, again you can see, and life. The symbol often appeared in Egyptian art as a physical object representing either life or related substances such as air or water, commonly depicted in the hands of ancient Egyptian deities, sometimes being given by them to the pharaoh. It represents their power to sustain life and to revive human souls in the afterlife. Keep that in mind. Revive. The ankh was a widespread decorative motif in ancient Egypt, also used decoratively by neighboring cultures. Copts adopted it into the crux ansanta, a shape with a circular rather than droplet loop, and used it as a variant of the Christian cross.